Everyone. So absolutely delighted to see that we have about 66 participants. And John and team, I think it's quite a testament to the interest that there is in the topic that you're going to cover. And look, my bit is really to just welcome everyone. It's been a bit lonely just doing these type of webinars. Remotely and not being able to catch up with everyone. But I think that it also enables us to organize things in a completely different way. John is someone that I met. I think at the end of last year or very early this year, and we always had the intention to organize something together because obviously the topics of process improvements and in house to build teams and automation and technology and how that all comes together were, even when John and I met, were topics that were incredibly pertinent. I think that given the current context, it somehow becomes even more important. And I'm really, really excited to get the legal managed services team to come and and not only share their insights, but actually share a very concrete example on how they have been able to do that for a client in particular and other clients. As Hedy shared, do not be shy. Looking at the list of attendees, we kind of somehow know you all. Feel free to participate. Raise your hand if you want to engage live. Please just, for context, just give a 3-word introduction of who you are, just out of courtesy for John and Manisha and the team, so they have a sense of your context and how they can answer your question. But yeah, let's dive in, guys. Right? I'm excited about the content that you guys have to share. Over to you, John. Over to you.
Thank you, Naomi. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Yeah, thank you. And first of all, just, thanks for inviting us into the Flip family. Obviously, we're new members, but really excited to be part of the community and collaborate and share experiences. So thank you for that. So just a quick introduction to myself. I'm a partner at EY here in Singapore, and I run our Asia Pacific legal operations business. So for EY, there's really 2 strands to that. It's the sort of legal function consulting piece and legal operations consulting piece, and then obviously there's the legal managed services piece, where we now have over 1,000 people around the world providing a range of legal managed services for clients. A big part of that is around sort of enterprise contracting, hence this sort of case study today that we thought we would share. And yeah, look, delighted to share this case study. Manisha's the subject matter expert, not me, so I will pass over to her in a minute. But I think just a couple of points we wanted to stress is, this is a real example of, one of these projects working at scale where, you're combining people, process, and technology to deliver the right results. And we're big believers in technology being a fantastic tool, but we are strong believers in that it's an enabler, and you need the required people and processes around the technology to get the most out of it. And I think this is a good example of how we've been able to do that. None of these projects are without their challenges, so we're not here presenting it to you as a sort of a stellar world-class best practice. We're presenting it more from the point of view of, we've had this experience now for 6 years learning in this project, and just sharing some of the things that we've seen and how the project's adapted over time. But, this is sort of 6 years hard work. I think it's over 25 countries, if I'm not mistaken, Manisha. 39 playbooks, 300 templates, and all in all, we've had over 1,000 people from EY working on this engagement over the last 6 years. So there's a lot of work that's gone into it, but I'll hand over to Manisha, who's a senior manager in our team.
hoping to be able to share some insights based on what we have done for this client, and hopefully a little more broadly, the learnings that we have had from supporting various clients in optimizing their contracting function. Just as a quick introduction, like John said, I'm a senior manager with EY. Been working in the contracting space, reviewed and negotiated several contracts, and hopefully, as we've done with this client, we have been able to re-engineer processes, leverage technology, and bring the right people with the right expertise to make contracting process more efficient. And that's been my focus in the last few years. So with that, let me start sharing my screen, and if you could please let me know if that's working fine. Sorry, just a quick second. Yep. Yeah, it should be on now. Is that visible to everyone?
Yeah, we can see it, Manisha.
Perfect. All right. So like John was saying, we've been working with this client over the past 6 years, have obviously the engagement has evolved and developed, and that was always the idea, as you'll see as we get into the details of it. And we're hoping to share some insights, the challenges we faced, how we overcame them, and what were the results that we were able to drive through that. So here's a quick overview of what we'll talk about. So we'll start with the challenge, how we design the solution specifically for the clients, the things that we consider a little more broadly in designing the solution, the impact or the results that we were able to drive through that, where we stand currently and what this engagement looks like currently, and some of the learnings that we took away from it and perhaps we've gained more broadly as well. Right, so let me start by sharing a little bit of background. This particular client is a large multinational operating across several different geographies, has each with their own jurisdictional peculiarities, of course, has thousands of suppliers and distributors and an expansive team. Now, the challenges that you see on the screen aren't uncommon in any way, but obviously compounded by this expansive scale that the client has. So some of the challenges that we saw were a very disjointed global purchasing function, which increased the inefficiencies and the contract risk. The in-house team was thoroughly inundated by day-to-day contracting, and they weren't finding the time to truly partner with business on the strategic deals that needed their attention. The processes for different teams were very different. They were operating in silos very often. There was technology available, but because there wasn't the discipline of the process, the technology wasn't being used to optimally. And for instance, there was a contract repository, but nobody would put contracts there, and therefore it could not be relied on. Similarly, there was a lack of compliance with internal policy, and there wasn't as much visibility into what was and was not agreed to. And a lot of this put together led to delay in contracting, sometimes the absence of contracts when contracts would expire and nobody would get to know. And that delay in contracting obviously led to loss of revenue. As we started off, one of the primary objectives that the client had was to ensure that deals can be closed out faster so that business was enabled to work at the speed that they needed to address the revenue leakage. They also wanted to look at ensuring compliance, making sure that there isn't any disruption to the supply chain. We were keen to leverage technology to drive standardization, but more importantly, we wanted to have a solution with automation that adapted to the business growth and needs in the future. And we wanted to deliver sustainable value through a continuously improving legal service, something that could adapt, look at various technologies, look at various business needs specific to countries, specific to products, and accordingly keep changing to add the necessary value in the right places. So with that, let me jump into the solution design phase. And there are a few slides in this, and I will try and cover different aspects of it. The first one that we want to talk about are the basic principles of it. Now, of course, these will vary for every client, depending on priorities. Even with this client, we know that this changed at different times, or for different specific projects, we had different priorities. But if we could summarize it, these would be the main ones. Now, of course, three main levers of people, process, and technology remain constant. But given the client's priorities, their pain points, their objectives, we wanted the solution to address the immediate challenge, but as much as equally, it should be something that was long-term, that was enterprise-wide, and would be able to adapt to future needs of business and also scale as we went along. So one of the first aspects that we looked at was to make sure that this solution covered end-to-end contracting. Very often when we are looking at contracting solutions, we tend to focus on the review, the negotiation, intake, up until the point that the signature, the contract is signed, and then our job's done. But if the team that is actually performing the contract is not able to find the contract when it needs it, and therefore leverage the airtight conditions, terms and conditions that we have put in place, that contract is of little use. So it was important for us to look at the whole process, the review and the negotiation and putting the contract in place, but equally the storage of the contract, making it available to people and in a manner that they could use, because we have to keep in mind that these are not lawyers that are eventually performing the contract. The second piece was automation. Now, while we were clear that we wanted to leverage automation and technology to make this process more efficient, we wanted to take a more phased approach so that we could learn from it as we went. Now, we wanted to do this in two ways. One, we set out to build a beta test system that would help us streamline the process. It was a stopgap solution, custom built at low cost, but helped us bring everything together on one platform and then tweak the process because it was easily customizable. And then as we took these learnings and implemented them more widely, we wanted to go phase by phase, to each country or business line and take the learnings from one and apply them to the next, as well as show some quick wins to the team. And you'll see this theme pretty much across the different things that we did. The next one was compliance, and the client wanted to make sure that we are capturing deviations so that one, there is transparency into what is agreed to, what the variations are, what the risks are, but also learn from this and then feed back into the negotiation strategy, the policies, the contracting template, etc. On the same sort of thread of capturing data, they wanted to capture performance-related data as well. So there had to be a robust reporting mechanism so that we could understand how both internal and external stakeholders were doing, and the leadership could make the right interventions. And finally, all of this sort of feeds into the last piece, which is your continuous improvement piece, and the thought process behind all of this was to enable the legal team and ourselves to continuously improve our approach based on trends, business needs, local regulations, as well as developing technology. Now, like I was saying earlier, obviously these can vary for teams, but these are some of the things that we kept in mind as we started off with the solution design process. Moving on to the next slide, we're going to focus a little more on how process and technology work together to make this optimized system. Now, of course, automation is key. It is a powerful tool and it must be leveraged by legal teams and business teams to make the contracting process more efficient. But to enable automation or a piece of technology to deliver the system, the value that it's capable of, it is really critical to be able to look at the process first. And I'll be walking through a few examples that we have seen through each of these phases and how that has played out, or what role the process has played in each of these phases. But generally, like enveloping tech with process, whether it is just making the process automation ready or deploying the automation and doing the change management is what we generally think has made these automations successful, or a process of optimizing the process successful. So to walk through the examples, starting with contract generation, to automate a contract intake and creation, we need templates that can be used across business lines and geographies. Now, we've had clients that have come to us and with 600 templates wanting to automate it. Now, there's obviously no way to do that, and that's wasted effort. So there's a lot of effort that goes into looking through those templates, studying them carefully, talking to stakeholders, understanding why deviations exist, what is being used, what is not being used, and harmonizing them to bring them down to a number that can be automated and that can be used across business lines and countries and different products and services at times without compromising on the customization that is required. So there's a lot of work that goes into that. There's also need to design the template format of the template in a manner that allows for feeding intake form related information that we get from intake forms, fallback positions, alternate optional clauses, etc. So similarly, on the clause library front, now very useful tool for any legal team, helps save a ton of time not having to redraft a clause from scratch every single time we see a certain situation. But if this is not monitored and is not, the clauses or alternate positions don't have the necessary context and the rationale with them, we run the risk of making very exceptional positions the norm. So it's important that they are looked at carefully. There's a process to add rationale. There's a process to add the approval, matrix to each of these clauses so that we ensure compliance while also focusing on efficiency. The third one, which is your approval and stakeholder collaboration. So for instance, in this case, this is a large client spread across different countries and obviously several different business lines and teams. It's really, really important that the workflow that we bring in place to automate the approval and stakeholder collaboration is thoroughly customized. And the more the number of teams, the larger the client, the more important this becomes. We have some very robust technology that can genuinely help drive efficiency in this space, but that is only possible if there is enough thought that has gone into designing that workflow as well as support along with it. The last aspect of this is obviously change management, making sure that the team is able to adopt these changes and get familiarized themselves with these changes and have the support to gradually move to this automated way of doing things, which obviously brings me to the next one, which is, to my mind, one of the most crucial ones, change management, from understanding the context and preparedness to adopt change, to getting buy-in from various stakeholders, to designing, running trainings, little things like making sure that everybody is aware of the new process, who to reach out to for help. We did pamphlets and stuck them up all over the office to make sure that they have the helpline number handy and they're never sort of feeling frustrated by the fact that they don't know what to do with the process. Goes a long way and is crucial to almost any piece of automation. Now, standardization is localization. Now, may seem a little contradictory, but let me try to explain a little bit. Now, as lawyers, we all feel like every contract needs to be drafted from scratch. Every contract is unique and customized, and it has to be done, built from scratch, and needs to be tailored to the country, to the product, etc. Now, while that is true, we've also seen that there is a lot of commonality between these. The idea is to allow for customizations, but put a method around how this should be done and track that information. And when we have done that, we've very often seen that the same changes are being made by different people in the same country or the same business line. And when we're able to go back to them with that data and say, look, you're spending so much time making these customizations, but really they're very similar to each other, and we could be putting a process or a module or template in place to help you save this time. It's something that's welcome and accepted very easily. So it's important to allow for customization, but do that in a standard manner and have a method to do it and track it. The next few ones are obligation management and reporting. Obviously, like I was saying earlier, with this line, for instance, when we sort of visited one of the sites and started talking to the people working in the operating companies, we realized that while we may put these contracts in place that have really favorable terms and are airtight, the team on the ground that sends out products to the distributors or receives these supplies from vendors doesn't really always know what are their obligations as well as the remedies available to them. So two things: one, the contract has to be available, and they need to be made aware of their, what their rights and remedies are. But also, it has to be done in a format that is simple enough for them to understand, because it's very difficult for these teams to understand the legal jargon or a legal contract and draw from it what their remedies or their obligations are. This, of course, feeds into several systems, like your invoicing systems, your payment systems, but at the same time enables the people who are performing these contracts on the ground to ensure they are compliant with it, and therefore leads to less possibility of breach. And finally, all of the data collated together is very powerful, but it needs to be translated to actionable insights, tailored to the right stakeholder, supplied with context so that the client can really use that and make improvements to it. So that's just a quick overview of how we think tech and process work together. Through all of this, automation is key, it's important, but this is to say that we need the right process to be able to draw the benefits that automation can possibly deliver, or technology stands to deliver at this point. Now, the next slide is a quick illustration of an automated contracting process, a very skeletal and high-level one, of course. As with any contracting process, it starts with business raising an automated request, which then, through a system goes through the contract generation process, either with the help of the clause library or the review of third-party template with the help of a playbook. And if everything is aligned, we would send and pre-approved, it goes through electronic signature, is stored appropriately, and the obligations are extracted. Now, alternatively, it goes through the deviation process and the approval and negotiation process. And after all of this is done and data extracted, the data feeds back into the main, into the whole process to make it more streamlined and more sophisticated. However, let me actually say this: while each part of this process that you see on the screen can be automated, the thing that is important to note and keep in mind, as we did with this client, was that all of it need not be automated in one go or through one platform for that matter. There are certainly benefits in having a robust enterprise CLM platform, but there's equally advantages to going piece by piece, so long as we have a holistic view and are looking at every single piece in the context of others and how it's impacting the others. The benefit to that is that, one, we've bitten off bite-sized pieces and can show quick wins and convince stakeholders and get their buy-in so that they're more ready to collaborate with us in the future. But also it helps us take those learnings and apply them to the next stage, and therefore drive more value and have that much more richer an experience as we go about automating these pieces. Okay, so the next slide is a quick, again, a more high-level slide and a broader view of the different stages of optimizing the contracting function. What we see with many organizations, as we did with this client, like we talked about before, we often start at a stage where most decisions are reactive. Changes and improvements are often ad hoc. Teams certainly are, tuned to contract management, and they want to bring in technology and drive efficiencies. But unfortunately, they tend to be doing this separately in the separate silos, and therefore data also tends to sit in those silos and not interact with each other. Therefore, the leadership may not have a good enough view into what is happening, what needs to change, where is intervention required, etc. Now, our effort is always to try and move up this value chain, but obviously very gradually. We first start by defining the process, making them repeatable, along with that, standardizing them, understanding what are the differences, why do they need to exist, can they be harmonized, is there a way to bring them together, And once that is done, then we look at automation. It could be one enterprise-wide CLM solution. It could also be more niche platforms that address the specific needs for specific stages or aspects of the contracting process, especially if there is a industry expertise that is needed. And finally, once the system has been automated, be able to try and integrate the system. Now, the way to do that for us is to either try and make sure that there is a platform that all of these individual platforms feed into, if you're not able to deploy a platform across the entire organization, or have a layer of process or services that make sure that everything is collated and then put together to find the trends and identify what needs to be done next or what improvements could be made. Finally, I mean, all of this data that we collate obviously helps us learn and adapt and make the process that much more sophisticated, add that much more value for business, make the workflows that much more tailored to each team, and finally, maybe tie into other business processes as well. So now, again, for us, in this particular project, what worked as we went through that process of optimizing the contracting functions and went up that value chain, what worked really well for us was, and what to our mind enabled this success, was the collaboration that we had with the legal team. In equal measures, the collaborations that we had with the business leadership within the client's organization and the tech provider. But the key standout for us was the willingness that the legal team had to innovate and try out different ways of doing things. And some of these worked, some of these didn't. But we learned from it and we were able to adapt. And there were times when we decided to not go forward with something, but overall, we think that it has gotten us some excellent results. As you can see on the screen, our objective was always to empower business. And with that objective in mind, we've been able to deliver several solutions, multiple templates, playbooks, clause libraries that eventually enable self-service of contracts through automated contract generation. And we'll talk a little more about how many of these contracts and what results it has driven. We've simplified workflows and approval matrices and enabled automated triaging of work, which makes the process more efficient, but also a lot more transparent. Tested various tech solutions for suitability and deployed the ones that were selected, and finally set up help desk support for better adoption and more effective feedback. Like I was saying earlier, our focus was to empower business to make, to achieve that deal velocity that we talked about earlier, while ensuring compliance and not compromising in it, as well as measuring performance was the other thing that we wanted to make sure, so that we can, again, sort of keep on track with our objective to continuously improve. And that also allowed leadership to make interventions wherever it needed to, whether it was, to provide more support or to drive a behavioral change, etc. Right, so continuing on the same thread, I wanted to quickly talk a little more about the timelines, the timeline of the evolution of this relationship. We started with understanding the client's ways of work. Yep.
Manisha, sorry, it's John here. I've just seen there's a question's popped up. Okay. And the question is, who was the driver of the project on the client side? So I don't know if we just want to address that now.
Sure, happy to. In this case, the driver of this project was the legal team. But, and they were taking charge. They had the responsibility to help business improve the contracting process. But like I was saying earlier, the business leadership also was a key stakeholder, and most decisions around this were made with their involvement. So yeah, that was the case here.
Thanks.
I hope that answers the question. Are there any other questions, John, that we should perhaps take right now?
Why don't you move on and we can address them as they come up. Perfect.
All right. Okay, so to give you a quick summary of how the relationship evolved, we started off in 2013. The first step for us was to understand the client's ways of working, because we want to make sure that there is as little change as possible, and only that's only done when it's necessary. We wanted to introduce a new process for contracting so that there was more transparency, more compliance, etc., the things that we talked about before. And we did this by, one, introducing the custom built CLM platform, and two, by creating a team of lawyers that could support the legal team and help them achieve their objective of being able to focus on the strategic deals and taking off the day-to-day contracting from their plates. Now, once this was done, we continued on in 2014, conducting workshops, roadshows, and just making sure that we had the right engagement with business so that we could get feedback directly, drive engagement, familiarize ourselves with their processes and their stakeholders. Then in 2015, we took on a project to identify all the relationships that did not have contracts or did not have contracts up to the standards that the client had and in compliance with their policies, and ensure that we had complete contract coverage. Now, having refined and streamlined the process and tested it through this process of creating and covering 6,000 different relationships with contracts, the client wanted to deploy an enterprise-wide CLM solution with those learnings that we had already gained. We advised them in designing and configuration of the system and supported the implementation across 50+ countries, where we trained users, helped them with the required customizations, got the necessary buy-in, and of course supported through the adoption process. Now, once this was streamlined, this was the global contracting process, we shifted our focus towards streamlining the local contracting for indirect purchasing, marketing, and sales across 20 different countries. Now, while the global contracting spread across countries, of course, but still had a consistent policy and a consistent approach, local contracting obviously was a whole different animal, different regulations, jurisdictional requirements, but also different preferences, cultural preferences, etc. And as we worked through these, we brought in several platforms, tested out several platforms, and deployed some of them. We set up a contracting help desk in 2018 to support with that, to help business teams with real-time support and also get feedback from them. And as of in 2019, we supported the automation of contracts by creating a logic for multiple different templates, and we'll talk more about the number of templates. And we generated about 4,000 odd automated contracts in 2019. So through all of this, like you'll see, our effort has been to streamline the process and then automate it. And you'll see the results that we've been able to drive through this in the next slide. So, right, so like as we were talking about earlier, we've generated about 4,000 automated contract drafts in the first year of automation. 60 odd templates have been automated across 40 different countries. Remember, this is for local contracting. So this includes the country-specific variations and clauses for the same contract. Almost every country has its own set of requirements. We've been able to reduce the average turnaround time for each draft of the contract from 5 to 6 business days to 2 business days, and the overall time taken to close a contract by 60%. Now, overall, there has obviously been a marked improvement in efficiency, which helps the client check their deal velocity requirement. But also there's been better compliance, global alignment, transparency around both where the contract stands, but also the risks in the contract and the deviations we're agreeing to, right? What we talked about earlier around localizing and customizing, but following a standard process and tracking it. And like I was mentioning earlier, very often we're able to take back all of this data and go to the client and say, hey, we're making customizations, but they're all very similar. Should we put a process to make this a little more efficient and save people a lot of time? And that's worked out well and helped us as well as the business team. And finally, enable the leadership to make decisions based on data-driven insights and backed by hard data. Now, we currently, like John was mentioning earlier, have a team of 25 plus full-time lawyers and contract management professionals supporting this engagement. And over the course of 7 years, this number is over 1,000. Over 1,000 team members have supported this engagement. Again, so a few more of listing out a few more of the results that we've been able to drive. Like we talked about earlier, building a custom CLM tool as we streamline the process and creating a single centralized repository for all contract, which of course involved, consolidating for multiple repositories. So that included data migration, data cleaning, and sort of moving that from multiple different repositories that different teams had or different countries have to one common repositories that fed into the different other business processes and systems. Increasing transparency and resourcing around resourcing through automation, triaging, and transparency around contractual terms as well through deviation and obligation tracking. Optimizing and the capture and management of knowledge so that all stakeholders, whether it's local legal, global legal team, or the business stakeholders, have access to the same information and are following the same guidelines as they are negotiating these contracts. And finally, reducing the overall risk by making sure that we have better contract coverage and compliance with the policies. So having sort of walked through the solution, the timeline, and the results, just a quick snapshot of where we stand currently. What does this project or this engagement look like currently? In its current state, this engagement involves day-to-day support. That's a combination and a healthy combination of automation as well as in-depth review done by lawyers and contract management professionals. There are certainly still parts that we'd like to automate more, but like we talked about, we want to take a phased approach, learn from it, and go gradually and make sure we're doing it well. The other aspect, obviously, is the deep collaboration that we have with the client and their other stakeholders. It could be business, it could be tech providers, and the strategic initiatives around the strategic initiatives which are focused on improving the process, driving more value, change management, etc. So to quickly walk through them, we support end-to-end contract management, from intake to execution and beyond. That was important. This spans across several different teams: procurement, sales, CapEx, research, R&D, logistics, IT, marketing, and of course, different complexity of contracts, your NDAs and distribution agreements that are fully automated, to your SWLAs and CapEx contracts that need thorough negotiation and multiple iterations. We manage all the workflow that comes with that, keep making tweaks and improvements to it as we go along. Then we also, on a day-to-day basis, track a lot of information. Now we track performance information, performance data for internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders like ourselves. The workflow and approval data so that we can make improvements to it, see where intervention may be needed, and where should we provide additional support perhaps. We also put together monthly and annual reports that help the client identify trends and take action accordingly. And finally, we also help them track deviation trends and then feed that information back into the template and the negotiation strategy so that we can make it more efficient. So for instance, if a clause is being negotiated and taken out every single time, there's probably no reason for it to stay in the template and make the negotiation process lengthier. And that is the sort of insights that we are able to provide on a day-to-day basis to make that process more attuned to what the business needs are and what the business is finally agreeing to. We talked about this earlier a little bit, but we also help with playbook building, creating process documents, designing processes wherever needed, customizing clause libraries for countries, customizing processes for countries, and overall knowledge management. Equally, the last two pieces that you see, which is change management and process design and tech deployment, are the ones that need a lot more collaboration with the client. as well as other stakeholders. But this, of course, involves training different teams, making sure change management is well thought through and also followed through by monitoring the reactions and then making targeted interventions. Setting up help desk, one of the things we did to do that. Coordinating between stakeholders to ensure there is a coordination or standardization across geographies and functions. And finally, designing workflows, designing templates, designing intake forms so that automation can be used in the best way possible. And all of these are part of things that we do on a day-to-day basis. So in closing, we wanted to share a few key learnings and from this engagement, as well as what we have gained from having supported other clients with a similar contract optimization process. Now, above everything else, the key to all of this is the collaboration between the legal team, the tech providers, and the process experts. The legal team has to be willing and open to doing things differently, and with collaboration with the tech providers and process experts, it's important that we plan for the future. That is, even as we are looking at small bite-sized pieces, we look at where our end goal is and keep our options open and not design ourselves out of certain options. At the same time, even the most robust systems need to be tailored to the right audience. They need to be customized to make sure that we're deriving the most value from them. Otherwise, they end up we've seen them becoming process overheads at times that don't add much value because they aren't fit for purpose. Now, aside from that, obviously, organizations must seriously look to harness the power of automation and artificial intelligence to make contracting more efficient and transparent, and help experts focus their efforts on where it's needed, and make the process more transparent. And equally, it is important to look at the process, because in absence of the right process, and adequate support and discipline, we have seen, like I was saying earlier, the most robust systems becoming an overhead for stakeholders and not adding the value that they can possibly add. Measuring performance, again, a key factor. It's important to hold stakeholders accountable, flow down mandates to drive behavioral change at times. It is also important to understand where things may not be going right, where there may be need for intervention, where there may be need for more support, and measuring data and capturing data helps you do that a lot better. And finally, and most importantly, if I can say, change management is absolutely central to the whole process. Each step from getting buy-in to educating to monitoring how things are going is crucial to the process. So yeah, that brings me to the end of the presentation. John, if you have any closing comments, or we could perhaps open this to everyone for questions.
Yeah, I think there's some good questions, Manisha. Maybe we should run through the questions. I suppose just one closing comment, and thank you, Manisha. I thought that was great. Just to share a bit of sort of perspective on what we're seeing in the market. I think one of the things that we've seen over time with these type of engagements is that although cost is always a driver, whereas maybe 5 to 10 years ago cost was the main driver, I think now the main driver for a lot of clients in this space is around, Manisha highlighted, management information and data. So, once you put your contracts through systems like this, and when I mean system, I don't just mean technology, I mean people, processes, the amount of data that we're able to pull from the contracting processes is, significantly more than clients have had previously. And I think that's just a key point, and we've seen that sort of change over time.
Hey, you were saying something?
Yeah, I just wanted to close the recording for now. So thank you, Manisha and John, for the insightful case study. We'll end the recording here and move into the Q&A. So thank you for watching.
Thanks, Hedy.